So I'm Andrea Gibbons. I am the network coordinator for Sustainable Food Places. And we're like really happy. And thanks to Mara for kind of making this happen. We're really happy to welcome Megan Blake from the University of Sheffield here to talk about her work. And she's been working on this for a really long time, but the toolkit's out. Yeah, so I'll leave you to introduce anything else you want to say, Megan, but I'll hand it over to you and also to Mark Game from the Bread and Butter Thing, who will both be speaking today. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for coming today. Really, it's really great to see you all. So I'm hoping you can see my slides. Can somebody just give
Yeah,
me a
they look good.
brilliant? Thanks. I'm never sure with these connections. So I work at the University of Sheffield. I'm in the Department of Geography. My interest is around food security in economically wealthy context primarily. So places like the United Kingdom, but also the United States and Europe. I've been doing this work now for about, 15 years maybe. And I'm really grateful to have Mark Game here with me today, co-presenting. Mark has been a friend for a very long time. And it's great to see so many of you that I also recognize and to meet some new people. So page down, there we go. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just talk briefly about what Food Ladders is. And then I'm going to hand over to Mark, who is from the Bread and Butter Thing, which is I'll let him explain because he can do it very well. But it's a really good example of rung to activity in the food ladders. Sometimes we think about, sometimes it needs a little bit of help defining what the differences and the distinctions between rung one activity and rung two. This will all become clear if you don't know in a few minutes. And Mark really can talk about that with some really excellent comments from people who are kind of using the service. And then I'll talk a little bit about the toolkit that we've made to kind of facilitate people being able to use it. So the food ladders model. And sorry, there we go. So food security means people are getting more than just calories, that they have the food they need to live their very best life. That means they have food that's nutritious and culturally appropriate, and they're able to engage with food in such a way that they can benefit from its commensal qualities. Recent research that I've done using the Food and U2 data shows that 1 out of every 4 adults in the UK is struggling and more than struggling, they're not getting the food they need to be able to eat regular meals, let alone live their best lives. And this, to me, seems appalling in a country that's one of the wealthiest in the world. So it's not just about having food. So it's also about social justice, being able to determine or have a role in determining the food systems that we engage with, to be treated fairly within those food systems. And that's really what the Food Ladders is trying to do. So the Food Ladders imagines a community food system as a ladder. It's a metaphor designed to or used to help you visualize and think about how we might build toward a food system that meets the needs of everyone in the places where they live. So each rung, the food ladder itself is made up of 3 connected rungs, and each rung represents a different type of activity. So rung 1 is catching, and this is the kind of standard stuff that we think about when we think about food support. Rung 1 is really important because when you're in crisis and having a space to pause and regather is really important. It can mean the difference between sinking and survival. But we can't stay there forever. Living in that sort of liminal space or on a lifeboat isn't really very sustainable for people. And the gap between crisis and what we think of as everyday or normal activity is really quite large. On top of that, quite often a lot of what we think about as regular activity or what is normal activity is also contributing to the issues that we face that are creating food security in the first instance. So the food ladder really is about trying to move away from just catching people and then putting them back in to the existing situation, but actually to help move and collectively recreate a better food system. So rung one activity might be emergency food parcels, it might be soup kitchens, it might be basic sign posting, it's emergency activity, and it's done to or for people. But what it doesn't do is it really doesn't expand in any long-term way the resources people need to be food secure. And there's resources, of course, include the financial resources, being able to engage in a marketplace and buy the things that you need, because that's the system within which we live, and that's where we get most of our food. But the resources also include other things, and we know that people who, there are some people who have a small amount of money and they're able to be food secure, and other people with the same small amount of money aren't able to be food secure, and that's because of the other resources they have that they can access. So these other things include things like social resources, so being able to share with friends, to be able to collaborate, to be able to join together in a community and for example, buying clubs and so forth. So it's also things like mutual aid and acceptability, accepting where other people are. Health is also a key resource. So having the mental space or the headspace to be able to plan and organize is really important. And of course, when you're stressed and struggling, that headspace gets squeezed by other priorities and other issues. It also includes the physical health. So being able to stand at a cooker or to be able to open a tin also impacts on your ability to be food secure. There are things like knowledge and know-how. So knowing what different foods are and knowing how to put them together or how to cook them is really important. We know that people know how to cook. The vast majority do. The thing is, they may not know what a celeriac is because they've never seen it. And why would they? At the supermarket, because they're expensive and risky foods. Time is also a resource, the ability to engage with activities or set of interlinked activities. And people, we know that people's lives are busy and they're stretched in multiple ways. And of course, place-based resources. So these include infrastructures and materials in the places where people live so that they can access them. It's all great and fine having a bunch of support in a place, but if it's not where people are, and not in the place where people are living out their lives, it's not available to them. So really, those physical infrastructures are important as well. So rung two activities on the food ladder are seeking to kind of increase people's abilities to recognize, to have, and to mobilize those resources, that whole big pool of things. And examples of activity include things like community gardening, cookery and food hygiene and nutrition training, pantries, some voucher schemes. We can have a discussion about cash first at a later time if you like, and social eating activities. Mark is going to talk in a few minutes a bit more about his rung activities, so I won't go through it that much more. However, one of the key distinctions is it's done with people, it's not done to people. The next thing to think about, of course, and which I mentioned already, is it's all great and fine to create, to move people into a place where they've got resources, where they can cope with and manage for themselves. But one of the things that we need to be aware of is that our current food system isn't particularly fair. And we have legal, policy, and power relationships which disadvantage systematically certain groups compared to others. So, which is why we see that some people are much more vulnerable to food security than others. For example, people who live in highly deprived areas, their rates of food insecurity are significantly higher than those who live in more well-off areas. So it's about thinking about how do we redress some of this? How do we reshape our landscapes to make the kind of food futures that we want, that are environmentally sustainable, that are socially just, and that incorporate and engage with everyone. So rung 3 activity is this kind of activity. It's community led and it's done by people. There may be outside groups who bring resources into that space, but it's directed and driven by the people who live in that place. So they have the power, or have equal power relationships, and they're able to determine more about what their futures look like. So these include things like community-owned growing spaces, local food cooperatives and businesses, community-led campaigns on local interests that create more resilient communities. Rung activities, so that's the ladder broadly, but within each rung, there are different areas within the rung. I used to do this as separate ladders, but we decided to put it together in this iteration as one ladder with different component parts on each rung. Each area, and the areas that I've looked at because of my research tends to focus on food security, include things like food, social life, the environment, economy, and physical or mental health. We can imagine other areas as well. So if we were to repurpose the rung for changing farming activity, for example, there might be different dimensions. But in thinking about community food, these 5 sort of areas are the ones that that I have kind of highlighted, which seem to come up the most. And yeah, in the chat, big shout out for Isaac, who Isaac Tendler helped me with this work and did the graphics for this. So one of the things about food ladders that we've seen when people utilize it is that no rung is more important than any others. A ladder only works if the rungs are all there. Otherwise, it's just sort of a pile of sticks. So we need the rungs and we need them to be whole. People also often use multiple rungs at the same time. They move up and down the ladder depending on their circumstances. So we need to not think of this as an escalator. We need to think of it as a tool among many tools for rebuilding that we use to rebuild our foodscapes. All the rungs need to be connected to one another, and so there are also side parts on the ladder as well. So if we think about the side bits, we've got the rungs there. The side bits are things like local area-wide food partnerships, collaborations between organizations that share resources and information, signposting and referral systems, and community anchor organizations. These are the kind of glue that bring it into a network or make all the different kinds of activities that go on in a place part of and I can't say the word, constitutive of that particular place. They make that place. So a rung also has side supports, and those are also as important. The complete ladder gives people the range of opportunity to support and achieve resilient food security, building toward a future that kind of engages for everyone. So what I want to do now is turn over to Mark. I've known Mark for, as I said, for quite a long time, and I'm really honored to have my name on the back of one of his fans. So I couldn't resist kind of sharing this. So Mark, if you want to, I'll stop sharing and you can share your slides and then we can come back.
Okay. Bear with me one sec. It worked before.
I can
You
see
guys
it,
see
Mark.
that?
Yep.
Great. Fabulous. Still see it?
Yep.
Fab. Everyone, sorry about that. I'm not a Zoom person. So as Megan said, I'm Mark Game. I'm one of the founders of the Bread and Butter Thing, and we have worked in this Rung 2 space for some time. So I'm going to talk to you about the Bread and Butter Thing, what we do, how it works, and I guess some of the stuff around why this kind of Rung 2 space really works for us. So the Bread and Butter Thing is a charity. We're a CIO. We have been in existence for just over 8 years now, and we run what we call food clubs. So we offer people 3 bags of food for £8.50. That's the basic model. The 3 bags of food are a push model. People don't get to choose from us what they get. They get a bag of fruit and veg, a bag of cupboard goods, and a bag of chilled or frozen food, and typically tell us that they have somewhere between 40 to 50 quid's worth of food in those bags. We're very clearly not a food bank because people pay us, and we sit in the cycle of upstream from crisis. So we are in that preventative space where people are stretched and struggling, but they're still trying to stand on their own 2 feet. And we have last count 125 hubs across England with 100,000 members registered from all walks of life. But I think what's interesting about it for me is still looking at the demographics. It's over 80% of our members are female, and they still see that it's their responsibility to put food on the table. So Megan's already told you all of this. I don't need to tell you, but just to frame it, we do sit in the capacity building space on Rung 2. What we absolutely find is because we're sat in Rung 2, the people that we engage with are much more positively engaged. So we had the social editor, Patrick Butler from The Guardian, come to visit one of our hubs a while ago, and he was kind of set back because he didn't expect to see the kind of engagement, the eye contact, the positive banter that he was being questioned in the food club, because he was expecting to see people that were worried about being seen there and stigmatized, etc. And what he actually had was a positive experience. And that's really useful for us, because although we primarily do food clubs, we do a lot of bringing in third-party kind of wraparound services, such as citizens advice, public health, welfare rights, energy advice, all this sort of lovely stuff. And people are looking for these income maximization type supports when they come to our food clubs. So I don't really need to tell people on this why we're needed, but essentially what is interesting about the space is, again, it's really important to us. Megan mentioned it before, when Jane and I first started Bread and Butter Thing, we felt those inequalities and we like fairness, and we wanted to try and do something that could help address some of those inequalities. It's not appropriate that within the UK, people are kind of better off or worse off simply because of where they're born, in what circumstances. And we'd like to try and redress some of that balance, and giving access to affordable, nutritious food in communities that otherwise couldn't is the way that we could actually do that and build resilience by having a community-led approach.
Sorry, Mark, just to pause you just for a second, because it's a little bit small. If you click on the third icon from the left underneath the biggest slide, it should make that slide much bigger for everyone.
The third icon. Sorry,
Yeah.
guys. How's that?
I think so, or possibly not, or otherwise the option at the top that says use slideshow, just to make it a little bit bigger because it's not so big on everyone's screen.
Oh, sorry, guys.
So at the top on the right hand, yeah, that one.
How's that?
That
one.
Hey, better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Apologies,
okay.
guys.
Heck.
Okay, so right, difference we make. So we essentially, in the last 12 months, delivered about 20 million meals. That's about 8,000 tons. And I'm not sure I like this metric, but people talk about savings. But how do you actually have savings when people are actually trying to just stretch their budgets and they don't really have savings? Because if they don't get the food from us, what else could they do to afford it? But what we do see is reductions in food banks where we establish food clubs. So we typically have half of the people that come to us at every food club typically use food banks, but we see a significant reduction when they come to us in their food bank usage. So how do we work? So we are a B2C food club. So we collect our own food. We intercept food from supply chain. So we deal with manufacturers and distributors. We don't go to the back of supermarkets. We don't pick up with Neighbourly or Fresh Go or anything like that. We directly go into the industry side, and we take that into our warehouses. So we've got 4 warehouses now across England, one in Stoke, one in Trafford Park, one up in Durham, one over in Spalding in Lincolnshire. That is growing. And effectively, when the food comes in there, then our vans go out with approximately a ton of food every day to a community with what we would say is the best variety and volume that we can find for that day for each one of those hubs. And each van will drive out to one of the hubs, and at the hub they will be met by community volunteers. So 85% of our volunteers are from the communities, and all of the volunteers that are in the hubs are definitely from the communities. So there are corporates that we do use, but they're typically in the warehouses. So when we get there, they will help unload the van and pack the food into the 3 bags that I described earlier. Now, I know there's pantry models out there as well, but we see a fairness in the distribution so that everybody gets the same types of food in their bags. Once the bags have been delivered, and it's like a click and collect model, people text us requesting orders so we know how many people are going to be collecting food from there that day. Once all of that's done, then it's simply back to base. One of the things that we do, because we have everybody's mobile numbers, so we're kind of GDPR light. We don't get a lot of information from our members. We don't means test them. We scrutinize an area, not an individual. So everybody within a community is welcome. But what we find is that they will talk to us as a result. We have a strong relationship with our members. They're a chatty bunch and like to respond to our surveys. Megan's helped us over the years shape our surveys and has seen some of the results. And just to give you an example, we had our last survey was our annual survey is typically in November. Last November, we sent it out to 75,000 members, 9,000 of which completed a 70-question survey. Took them a good 20 minutes or so. So that's the level of kind of response and interaction we get. So we get strong data back, but it tells you then you can see what the kind of shape of our members. So you can see that the majority of them don't have money to spend on food. You can see that they're experiencing hunger. You can see that they're relying on credit cards to buy everyday food. And diets suffer on low incomes. So let's just, a very quick example. The Eat Well Guide was put together by Oxford University and Nuffield Health, I think it was. They last valued it at 2022 at £227 per person per month. Okay, now just bear in mind our households have £50, and a typical household is 3 people, so it's about 16 quid each that they have. So how on earth are they ever going to be able to eat healthily? And yes, they have to kind of bargain hunt, etc., to do what they can, but the dietary diversity is really, really difficult when it starts to challenge a budget. So people start eating lots of beige food. Just wanted to give you some insights on the data that we get. So we can see that there's a lot of borrowing going on that is not necessarily what you would call run-of-the-mill borrowing. This is just paying other debts off or making ends meet. This is nearly 3/4 of what people are borrowing for isn't what you would want them to be borrowing for, and it's not sustainable. And we've seen this growing since COVID. And the worrying thing about it is that the official statistics around debt won't really show all of this, because we're seeing it at a community level. Over half of it is actually what I would call illegitimate debt. So borrowing from friends and family, payday loans, home credit, all of this doesn't factor into kind of national statistics. So when people are looking at debt levels, they're not exactly seeing the full picture at a government level. Some of the qualities that we see from becoming part of a food club, and again, I think Megan talks about food being the stickiness. It's the glue that brings everybody together, and it really does. So we buddy up. So we don't have bricks and mortar. We partner with existing partners, with existing community projects. So our projects look like community centres, primary schools, adventure playgrounds, scout huts, all of these areas where there's a good beating heart of the community that we want to support. That's where we'll go. And so many of them have already activity and services that they want to support their community with, but they don't necessarily have the footfall. So one of the things that we bring along, because we bring the attraction of the food, is that footfall. And what you can see is 1/3 of our members had never used the hub venue before. And I think it's a really good way of being able to engage with them. And when we actually partner, one of the challenges that we go back to our partners with is, okay, now you're getting the footfall. What are we going to do to help widen our support to that community? So one of the ways we do it is we call it the Big Brew Time. And it's a really simple concept. Go back to our model when we first rock up at a community with the van of food. It takes 2 to 2.5 hours for us to unload the van and pack all the bags, etc. And whilst we're there, we've got a bunch of community volunteers there doing great work. So we open the doors to the community and just let everybody come along and just have a brew and a chat. But we also promote that to service providers at the same time. So service providers know that there is a pool of people from the community that they could talk to and engage with as well. So this is a really easy, simple concept, but it's because of our members not being in crisis and still got their heads up and still looking for that support, that the engagement really works well. And that's about it. Very happy to take questions, and I'll pass you back to Megan. You're muted, Megan.
Thank you. Never fails. We're just going to save the questions to the end, or you can put them in the chat. There's been a few questions already, so that's brilliant. I'm just going to share my screen again and go through the project that we've just finished. So the placing food, sorry, going the wrong direction. There we go. Sorry about that. So the Placing Food Ladders project is a project aimed at supporting the building of food partnerships and the building of food ladders in place. And so it's the the idea, the model, the idea of a ladder works really well and is fantastic for thinking about how to do this, but actually doing it, using it, requires a little bit of an instruction manual. So we engaged with 21 council areas across England who are using the food ladders in the work that they're doing. And we interviewed people from the council primarily, and then some other people who are supporting councils do things. So some local food partnerships as well. And then people who provide some financial assistance to local food partnerships. And so here's just a map of the places where we spoke to people. Our interviews work primarily, as I sort of suggested, combined local authorities, VCS or food organizations, and funding organizations. We found a number of things through these interviews that we did. Food is a fragmented issue, often split across a whole host of different teams within a local authority. And then when you consider outside the local authority, there are businesses and different collaborations and groups. So it requires a different way of thinking. It's not about an organized thinking, but it's about organizing across a network, thinking and coordination that needs to be done. We also found, direction. That within the councils, most of the interviewees work for public health teams, although many saw food as a multi-departmental issue for the councils. Very few of them, however, had an across-council formal organization. Leeds is an example of one that does. And so if you're looking for an example of joined up thinking within a local authority, the Leeds group is a really good example. We found that many of the interviewees that they used the food ladders directly to influence their thought around food work. So 33 of 34 interviewees said that the food ladders gave them a new perspective or way of working with food. The remaining person had been doing some of this work before and actually informed the research that started the food ladders off. So they came first. But what they said is it reinforced their existing perspectives. 7 of the local authorities we spoke to were explicitly, in a named way, using the food ladders as part of their food strategies and food plans to shape how they're organizing activity within local places. Some of the areas used the ladders with practical results on the ground. So 9 had organizations explicitly using the framework to inform their practice. 8 said that they'd been able to use it to achieve practical outcomes that they would not have otherwise. And all 34 said that they would recommend using the food ladders to others working in VCF organizations and councils. So there was a lot of enthusiasm amongst those who use the ladders framework. Of course, we didn't interview anybody who looked at it and didn't use it. So we don't know why people aren't. But for those who are, this is the positive kind of response we've gotten. We also found that many use theirs to influence their thought. So the thinking, the framework helps people frame what they're doing, which is what it was intended to do. And it gave them a different perspective. So instead of seeing the food support landscape as a flat landscape that's somehow different and separate from the commercial food environment, what the food ladders does is it connects those things together and makes it all one sort of way of thinking about a food system. Sorry, I realize I'm going back and forward but the wrong way with my slides. So we also found that the impact was really important from the food ladders. And some examples are people said that it helped people to see how people engage with this food system and where they are on that food system, and make sure that everybody is sort of in the same page. Some also said that when they've applied it to a policy framework, they were able to see the impacts and reception from the community, and that kind of build confidence in the approach. People liked it because it's simple to understand, but actually really, when you start digging into it, you understand it's quite nuanced, but it communicates to people effectively from the get-go. They also helps to demonstrate that other things are needed that sit alongside crisis to help people move away from crisis thinking. We can get bound up in crisis thinking, which then doesn't do much to change the wider context and increase the resilience for people. And the other thing is people like the positive focus of the model, that it's about building, it's not about saving, or it's not always these kind of doom and gloom kind of responses. People end up feeling enthusiastic and engaged with what they can possibly achieve within their local areas. We also saw that it changed the council's approaches. So, no, I'm on the wrong way, sorry again. Sorry about this, one of the things, it changes their approach and it changes the way people engage with each other. So some of the councils were saying that they now see that the connections between organizations that had been previously in competition with each other, and realize that they don't have to do everything, that actually you can collaborate with others and provide a better service in that way. Rather than to try to do it all, or to feel like you're under siege because there's only so many resources to go around. They also said that they really like the way that it helps people understand people who are struggling in a more multidimensional way. That the people who are struggling are also people who have resources to give and assets to contribute. They have interests. They have motivations. To be able to engage with people on that level, not just solely focusing on their struggle, was really a useful way to kind of build connection and bridges. We did find some barriers, that communicating to a range of stakeholders can be really difficult. That sometimes it's hard to know what the different rungs look like or what activity might look like. There's difficulty. One of the biggest barriers people talk is about coordinating and overcoming existing ways of thinking toward this sort of new approach, or different ways of thinking, a more asset-based approach. Some of the constraints or limitations are around understanding. So thinking about a top rung versus a bottom rung, which is one of the reasons why we laid the ladder on its side, and the use of climbing. There's a kind of reductionist notion that one element is better or more important than the other. But as we've tried to reiterate, that actually all the ladders are needed. Sometimes people also have said you can't just leave everybody to it, and it's a building process and it's incremental. So it does need some facilitation, and that does require some resource from local authorities or from someone to be able to support that person who helps coordinate, or people who coordinate, facilitate, organize the activities of others. We can't expect it just to be voluntarily led. And so it's a lot of work, and recognizing that it is a lot of work, and that it should be remunerated, is part of the issue. All right. So we found these key themes that were important, that kind of where we needed to have more tools to support people, and these included resourcing, organizing, communicating, implementing, motivating, visioning, and integrating. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip through these really quick, and it gives some examples. So one of the things councils were asking is, how do we resource this work? How do we do this if there isn't any core funding? And if all the funding focuses on emergency, how do we begin to move toward capacity building and activity? There's issues around organizing, and lack of central coordination. And actually, I would point you to the Sustainable Food Places, because they have so many really excellent tools around this. And we have linked in our toolkit linked across to some of their work as well. Communicating. So there's kind of a couple of areas of communicating that are really keen and that are really important. And it's not just about communicating the ladders or communicating the issue that's going on, but actually how you frame the problem or the issue, and how you frame it not only to policymakers or local authorities or residents, but also how you frame the activity itself to those who are using the services. So if you notice, I talk about people who are struggling, not people in food poverty. Mark's example of the big brew, I've missed out a B somewhere, is another example of really positive framing that actually gets people engaged and on side. So framing and communicating is super important. The implementing and the actual implementation, oftentimes we develop strategies and it's all great. We have action points and measurables and goals, but the actual doing of the work requires quite a lot of planning, but also a lot of doing work at the end. And sometimes this is a place where things at local scale get stalled. So we've created, that was one of the other issues that we saw, one of the other themes and set of tools. And then the other one, lastly, one of the things we saw is that people lose enthusiasm when they don't see forward movement. So you've got to keep moving people forward. And it requires some stamina, but it also requires a vision. And it requires that vision be revisited and shared on a regular basis. Otherwise, the vision becomes really fragmented and people aren't really sure what they're building toward. So we've got some tools around that as well. And then how do we integrate? One of the questions that we were asked is, how do we integrate the food ladders with other models? And so we've tried to provide some resources or ideas to help bring in and integrate the ladder against some of the other ways of thinking. So there's material from the Frameworks Institute, which is all about framing. There's material from Sustainable Food Places, and we really encourage you to be involved with some of those local food network types of activities, such as the Sustainable Food Places Network, in order to benefit from a network of networks. You don't have to do this on your own, I guess is what I'm saying. So just to summarize, sorry, that was a bit of a quick go through with backing and forwarding in slides. The Food Ladders Toolkit contains 3 areas of tools. So the first are tools and resources to situate the food ladders conceptually. There's examples. There's a bit about the theoretical background if you're interested. There's some information about what food ladders is and what it is not, and what it can and cannot do. Those sorts of things. The second set of tools are tools that kind of address or link to various, I hesitate to use the verb stages, areas of implementation. So there are a whole host of different things to consider when implementing the toolkit. And then the last set of tools are sort of more general cross-cutting tools, not linked to a particular stage. And in that last one, 3.4, communicating, all the graphics that Isaac has produced, and there are a couple of videos and some slide decks as well, those are available for you to use. So please do feel free to use those. We do ask that you credit the Food Ladders work team for that, but please do feel free to use those elements. We have drawn, so within each of these different sections, we have drawn from best practice guides that others have created. So we've curated elements for you, but we've also created some of our own tools that you can use, workshops that you can use with groups, ways of thinking about things. There's a tool for mapping the ladders at a local scale. We've created links to other data sets. I do encourage you to go through and just spend some time in the toolkit, because there's an abundance of materials there that you can draw on and go back to and engage with. And hopefully it will be useful. And I'd love to hear, if you're using the toolkit, if there's anything else you'd like us to include. There's a form on the toolkit that you can send responses, or you can just email me. That would be great. And it's the nice thing about it being web-based is that it can be expanded, so we can add more things as people want or need them. But yeah, please do give me your feedback on this. So just to kind of wrap up, I want to reinforce this kind of implementing includes framing. How are you going to talk about your food system in your place? It's about understanding what is there already. There's a work around partnership building that people need to do if they're going to build food ladders in place. Visioning is super important. So thinking about what is your shared vision, and what are you building toward, and keeping that in mind. And then planning for that, not just for the immediate, but how do we plan down the future to get from where we are right now to where we want to be in the future, and then constructing. We've put this as a circle because you might do some framing, and then you might do some visioning, and then you might reframe or revisit how you're understanding and framing things, and reshape. So it's really is a back and forth process. And hopefully when all these things have been done, the change will be visible, and we're beginning to see that. It's really great to see. So I will stop there, and we can answer questions from the audience. Both Mark and I are happy to do that. Please go visit the toolkit, and I'd be happy to hear from anybody on suggestions or additions. So thank you very much, and I will stop sharing. Be happy to take your questions. All right.
There are some questions in the chat, but I would say please feel free to unmute yourself and just ask the question, because there's so many of us and the chat's been so long.
So one of the questions I think is, will the videos be available? Yes, they are. Sustain, you will put the recording online?
Sustainable Food Places, yes.
Yeah, brilliant. That's right. Sorry. Sustainable Food Places will put the recording online, so that'll be available there. I think there's a question for Mark about TBT. Are you expanding in other areas of the country? And there's some questions about how does obtaining supplies work?
Okay, I can talk a little bit about that. So yes, we are expanding. We have some comic relief funding to help with a national expansion. So local authorities, etc., that are interested, do drop me a line. But we have slowly been working down England. We are talking to areas of Scotland and Wales as well. And typically we work well in post-industrial towns, rural or coastal type scenarios. And with regards to food supply, we spend a lot of money on food supply, but largely on simply logistics. So we engage with a lot of manufacturers and people like that will say, we've got food, Mark, but it's here. And then we have to organize the trucks to collect them. So we have partnerships with national third-party logistics organizations, such as lots of things like Harrison's Transport, Stobart's, KGT, all these kind of big trucks that you'll see on the motorways. And typically we try to use backhaul, which keeps it efficient from a carbon perspective and is slightly cheaper.
Fantastic. Thank you. Tilly, I think you have a question. Tilly's another student. Great to see you here, Tilly. Ex-student.
My camera on, sorry. My question is, and hello, Megan and Mark. Do you have any reflections on the different applications of the Food Ladders framework? I'm particularly interested in how that might apply to the Good Food Nation Scotland Act and its implementation for local authorities and health boards.
That's a really hard question, Tilly. I don't know the answers. I don't know. Linking together, one of the things we find is that, so most of the work that I've done has been done in England, and primarily in the north of England, but that has expanded in recent years. I do know, and I'm very aware that people in Scotland, or all local areas, are using the food ladders at local scale in Scotland, but the linkages between higher order government scale and local authority scale are not as well understood. So the idea builds on resilience theory, getting theoretical here, and there is no reason why it shouldn't work, but the intricacies or the specificities between national scale government policy and local policy is still kind of an open and difficult spot. It's even hard to do in England, where I've been working on it for a while. I do know, however, that food support that connects communities together addresses a whole host of issues that governments are concerned with. So not just about food. So for example, the current government the current UK government has 5 priorities, one around health, and obviously if people are eating better diets, their health outcomes are better. We also know that people who have strong social networks live better lives for longer, and there's clear evidence of this, live better lives for longer, even when they have health difficulties. So that, of course, addresses one of the central government's priorities. We also know from what people say from the surveys that we've done with Mark's bread and butter customers, partners, people, folks, and from other research that when communities are connected, there is less fear of crime, and there's more, people are more able to kind of police themselves, so that kind of issues around crime and antisocial behavior go down. And of course, that's another one of the priorities that the government has. So food support and the commensal qualities of food, alongside its nutritional value and energy value, is really important for a whole range of societal benefits, not just those that we think of specifically as to do with being hungry. So I've kind of wandered off your point there, Tilly, but your question there, but the answer is I don't know. Are there other questions? Did you want to follow up, Tilly, or is that all right?
Yeah, I suppose we've had lots of conversations about this, Megan, before. So I would have expected that answer. But yeah, I think it's important to try and think about the different contexts and the opportunity, in the sense that all local authorities legally, because of legislation, have to produce a food plan in Scotland. Is an opportunity in utilising this framework potentially. It's not an opt-in, it's a no choice situation. So how can that be, using the legislation to ensure that people use existing learning?
Fab, thank you. Do we have other questions? I'm just trying to look if there are any in the chat that we have not responded to. Yeah, Carolyn.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation, both of you. It's been really interesting. I'm in Scotland, and hi, Tilly. And we are one of the councils that have put together a food strategy already and looking to kind of link up across the council with a food focus. So I'm really interested in the work that you've been doing on the food ladders, and I'll share that with our working groups that look to tackle food poverty. And, we have a number of frameworks that we already use, but I think bringing this to their attention would be great. I've got a question for Mark, if that's all right. really interested, Mark, in your setup, particularly around your distribution. We are looking to try and create infrastructure within Fife as part of our big moves in our strategy to build that infrastructure that enables local food for local people. And that also includes delivering to where it's most needed. So really interested in that you've saying you've got your distribution set up using what already exists. I just wondered if you could expand a little bit more on that and say who you're working with in Scotland.
Yep. Okay. So when you say who we're working with, do you mean who we're talking to?
Oh, right.
Scotland?
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. So we're currently talking to NHS in Scotland.
Ah,
And so with regards to how we actually do the food and collecting it or using third-party organizations. So the infrastructure that we use, we kind of double dip with our vans. So we have a mobile model. They go from the warehouse to the community projects, but the community project and the way we work typically is about 3 or 4 hours in the day. So early in the morning or late in the afternoon, we will use those vans to go and collect locally as well. So they're all refrigerated vehicles. Some of them will freeze as well, so we can pick up anything from ambient to refrigerated, and that really helps locally. It works really well in Trafford at the moment, for example. So we've got about 14 vans operating out of there, and typically volunteer drivers will come in early in the morning, go and do some collections for us, and that's all happens before we actually have the kind of daily visits to the pubs. But then you've also got to look wider and bigger, because obviously people can also say, but I've got 20 pallets of something, can you come and
yeah.
get this? So you
Yeah.
also need the bandwidth to be able to have a portfolio of contacts in distribution where you can ring them up and say, a bit like taxi firms, really, I've got this product in this area, can you
Yeah.
get it to us, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So but you need a good list of people that you can ring, because typically the first one you call probably can't do it.
Yeah. So,
So
and you obviously, as you talked about your warehouses, and you're using refrigerated vans. So obviously your warehouses have not only just storage, but refrigeration.
yeah, so what we do for that, for the majority of them, so the one in Trafford, during COVID, DEFRA very kindly fitted out with a walk-in chiller and freezer. But
Oh,
in the other areas where we've expanded, we use containers. So container transport pods, 40-foot trailers, they will comfortably sit within our warehouses, and we plug them in using the kind of industrial 3-phase plugs, and we use them in the warehouse. So and they're not that expensive to rent, and they just tend to be kind of workhorses, really. They're used to being used in that way, and you can
yeah.
kind of bash them about a bit.
Wow. So, because we're just at the beginning of finding, where can we're just in the middle of a data project, so where our warehouses could go, for instance, and where
Yep.
does the food need to go to? What's the size of the demand? So it's just really interesting. Hopefully, we could maybe take
Yeah,
this offline, so we're not taking up all the
absolutely.
space.
Take it offline, and by all means, we are very much a learning and open culture. So if you ever want to visit, we'll happily show you around and see how it works.
And just one last thing. So it's NHS, general NHS, or any particular area of NHS? You're not allowed to say.
I'm not, sorry.
Okay. Oh, don't worry. Thanks.
There's one question in the chat about providing culturally, does TBBT provide culturally appropriate food?
So the way we address culturally appropriate food is we, particularly within surplus food, it's really difficult to provide culturally appropriate. So we offer a vegetarian offer instead. So, and typically in our kind of diverse communities, that goes down really well. People will pick up the vegetarian offer, and then with the money they save, they'll go off and buy their own culturally appropriate food. We've had some, even when we get kind of halal meat offers, etc., depending on your definition of halal, because we put it into a fridge or a van with other meat products that are not halal, it can compromise it or can be seen as compromising it as well. So it's quite a difficult thing to do. So even when we do have the halal, we don't necessarily call it halal. If that makes sense.
Fantastic. It looks like we are kind of losing people to other meetings, and I have to go teach. If there are no more questions, please, I want to just say thank you everybody for coming and for engaging so well with us today. And again, we are here if you want to reach out to us. And I'd really, again, like to thank Mara and the rest of the team at Sustainable Food Places for allowing us to have this event today. So we'll say goodbye to you all, and it was great to see you.
Thanks so much, Megan and Mark. And I will be making the toolkit, the animation, the slides, and anything else available to you all, and I'll email you all. So no worries.
Mara, could I leave my email for Mark so that I can communicate? Is that okay?
Caroline, I've literally just direct messaged you with my email address.
Oh, brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Fab. Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. That was tremendous.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye now.